So, yeah, thank you for everyone for coming along. We've mentioned tonight's theme to everyone as being a tribute to Dave Foster. Sadly, as we know, Dave Foster left us. No sooner that happened because the news came through that Carl Kingston had passed away as well. So we've got some slideshows we're going to be running in the background with Dave in the background. David Esp here has put a wonderful 15-minute video together of Dave Foster. I think we've got the little baby childhood photographs and things as well in there, kind of thing. So we'll have that all running in the background while we're doing the things. We're going to start with talking to Johnny the Lad. His first visit along here to the Southampton meetings. He's been promising for several years to come along. So Johnny's going to talk to us about how he got involved in Caroline, how he did his time on the Mi Amigo, and then we're going to bring Ray Clark into the conversation as well. Ray was on the same tender, starting on the Ross Revenge at the same time as Dave Foster, so they were the two newbies together. Dave ended up with a breakfast show. What programme did you end up with, Ray? You got the afternoon and Dave Foster got the breakfast show, so they go back together. So I'm sure Ray's got some stories to tell us about Foster, and then we'll have a few other comments going in as well. We've got an interview with Carl Kingston. Carl Kingston was the first voice that I ever heard on Caroline, so that's quite special to me. We met him last year over in Felixstowe at the Big L RSL, the bus that rocked, where they had it on an old London bus. Mandy did an interview with him on air for about 45 minutes, so we'll run the audio clip from that while we're having food, and that hopefully will be in about 45 minutes' time or something like that. So if Johnny's available and would like to join us, please. Yeah, lovely.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, I've got to say, there's not much point me interviewing you or prompting you. I'm sure you can talk non-stop for yourself.
What was that, non-stop or nonsense? A bit of both. Thank you anyway. Thank you for inviting me, and lovely to see you. Sorry it's been so long, and it's taken me a while to get down here, but living the other end, and right at the other end of Kent. I'm only 21 miles from France, but it's just obviously a bit of a trek, but I wanted to make it tonight. One for obviously Dave Foster, and two to have a chat and meet so many of you, and it's great to see so many of you here today, and thank you very much for coming along. So how did I get involved in the Mi Amigo, really, wasn't it? Back in 1987 was the first time I went out, thanks to Albert. There he is. Let me just put this down. Who was running boat trips at the time out to the Mi Amigo. And it was a cold old December morning. I do remember that we first went out and I saw the ship, and I went out on several of Albert's trips during the early part of 1978. And you might well recall that the Mi Amigo went off the air in October 1978 because of so-called generator problems. Albert was asked to go and have a look at the manned generators on the ship. And on the same boat that Albert went out on, I tagged along. Now, when I got on that boat, I had nothing with me because I was going ashore that day. I was not going to stay. Halfway out, I think we had a conversation, Albert, didn't we? I can't even remember how it happened, but he said, "Would you like to stay and help me?" So I said I could turn left and go back to my day job, or I could turn right and say, I'll stay on board the Mi Amigo. And I have to say, I'm glad I took the right decision, literally.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
Yeah. And it was a nice old trip out as well, wasn't it?
You didn't know you were staying until you were halfway out there.
No, I didn't know I was staying until I was halfway out there. And, and I thought...
He had the clothes he's standing up in.
And that was it. No, not these ones. You understand.
Like now.
But got on board the ship, and... I think you were out there, for 2 weeks or 1 week, Albert, was it?
Well, it was meant to be for 4 or 5 days, but I think it was nearer 14. Yeah. Because the weather got rough, didn't it?
Yeah, and I said I'd stay for as long as Albert was there and give him a hand with the man generators, which are...
That's right. Yeah. Now, can't remember the guy's name that was in charge at the time. Unfortunately, no longer with us.
Jim Code?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, it was Jim Code, James Day.
That's right,
Yeah.
Now, he said to Johnny, you can stay, but you must come off when Albert come off. Right?
Yep.
I came off after, 10, 14 days. Johnny came off after 13 weeks.
And that was thanks to Peter Chicago, who said, "Well, I hear you're a bit of a DJ as well. Would you like to stay?" So, which I did, and it was actually great fun at the time. I mean, there wasn't very many people on board. Tony Allen, Chicago, and I believe Bob Lawrence, Busby, was on board, and that was it. We had the station was off the air basically because I mean there was a few things going on behind the scenes.
Well, in all fairness, the Me Amigo was in a bad state. And I think Johnny used 1 or 2 wooden plugs to plug a few holes.
Just
maybe
one or
a bit
two.
of concrete.
Yeah, I became an expert at plugging holes. And that's probably why they asked me to stay, to be honest. When we used to get these holes appear, which we did on the Me Amigo, they're only the size of a 1p piece or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but
not major, but...
Not major, but you'd have to, pump the ship out literally every 6-7 hours. Otherwise, your record library would be starting to,
Well, we
go
know what
underwater.
happened. We know what happened.
Yeah, and studios likewise. But what we used to do was cut a piece of wood almost to the size of the hole, and this might sound stupid, but there was a reason for it, and then literally knock the wood through the hole, making it a bit wider, but eventually it would seal, and then concrete, pump the ship out, and then concrete around the hole in the ship, and that would seal it. That was our puncture repair kit. And it was thanks also to a friend of ours who was building the Orwell Bridge at the time that we had so much concrete on the boat, and thank goodness we did. And I think the sad thing is, no joking apart, that when the ship lost its anchor in March 1980, wasn't it? Yeah, March 1980, when she went on the sandbank, of course, these bits of wood would have been sticking through the bottom of the ship. Obviously, did that with them. And that's probably one of the reasons she sunk so fast as well.
Yeah.
So, but I do remember also that the last Christmas that we spent out there in '79. You were out there, Albert, weren't you?
Georgie was out there.
Yeah, Georgina was out there. We never told you this at the time. No, I mean, you know about it now. We actually sprang one hell of a leak. We had at the bottom of a stairwell coming from the mess room on the Me Amigo, going to the accommodations and the English studio, we had an inspection hatch. Now, I went out to go to the galley for some reason, and I thought, I can hear water. And it was quite a rough night, and I lifted up the hatch just at the bottom of the stairs, and this bloody plume of water literally sprang to the ceiling on the Me Amigo. And what did we do? We all went and got our cameras and took pictures of it. But that was the thing. We were just so blasé about it, weren't we, at the time? Because it happened more or less every day, to be honest. It really did. But anyway, we did get hold of the Coast Guards just to say that we had a bit of a problem, and it might turn out to be a major problem, just to put them on warn. But again, in the end, we managed to sort it out, and all was well yet again. But
for a little while.
Yeah, for a little while. I mean, the Me Amigo, such a lovely, absolutely fantastic ship. Outside, looked a wreck. It did, and we can't deny that.
Well, it was.
It was, yeah. But inside, wasn't she really cosy and very, very clean as well?
Nice and comfortable as well.
Yeah, very comfortable ship.
More compact than the Ross. A lot more compact than the Ross.
A lot more compact than the Ross. In fact, the Deutz, we've got, I don't know if you've been on to the Ross Revenge and you've been to the engine room, you'll see the main engine room on the Ross Revenge to give you some idea of how big the Ross Revenge is compared to the Me Amigo. The main engine on the Me Amigo was the Deutz. We've got 2 Deutz engines. Well, one seized, that's long gone. But there's still one left on the starboard side on the Ross Revenge. That's the exact same engine that was on the Me Amigo, but was the Me Amigo's main engine. And that gave the Me Amigo propulsion of 8 knots in its good days. You could actually fit 2.5 Me Amigos on the Ross. That's how the difference in the boats. So, and again, for me, and I think for anybody who worked on the Me Amigo and went to the Ross, it was difficult at first to actually feel comfortable on the Ross. It just didn't have that feel because it didn't have the history, if you know what I mean. Now, totally different. To me, the Ross is Caroline, the Mi Amigo's not. I mean, well, it always will be, but if you know what I mean, the Mi Amigo always will have that special place in your heart. It certainly will for me because it was the first ship I worked on. But the Ross Revenge has just got its own unique feel. It's sort of difficult to say unless you've sort of lived it, eaten it, and lived it. But such a wonderful ship. But yeah, my whole thing with first starting broadcasting on Radio Caroline. Always remember the first 2 songs I played, and I wasn't due on the air. This was April 1979, 17th. Which I think you'll find if you look in your diaries was a Tuesday. I can't remember who was going to be on the air, but whoever was going to be on the air was seasick, and we had a couple of other presenters who weren't the best in the best of health either. And Chicago was sitting, Chicago and myself sitting in the mess room, eating our dinner, no problems at all. And we looked at the clock, 7:45, and Chicago just turned to me and he said, "Have you ever done broadcasting, sir?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you're about to start." and that was it. And I do remember going to the studio, and it was we weren't using the bottom studio, the downstairs studio on the Mi Amigo at the time, because it was still being rebuilt because of the damage that was caused when we almost sank in January 1979. So we were using the what was the Radio Mi Amigo studio, but the Caroline Dutch studio at the time upstairs. And I do remember sort of running in there, getting a few songs together, and I remember playing, the first song I played was the Beatles, The Night Before. The second one was Derek and the Dominoes, Layla, but the album version. And the reason I played that, it gave me 7 minutes to run downstairs and find a few other records. Because the problem was with the upstairs studio on the Mi Amigo, to the record library, you had to run literally through the mess room, down a flight of stairs, then through all the accommodation, right to almost the front of the ship, and that's where the record library was. So, but that was my introduction to broadcasting. I wasn't on the air the next night, which was a Wednesday, but the Thursday they put me on the air again. And then at the weekend there was a boat come out and a message from Ronan saying, "Can you ask Johnny if he wants to stay? Please put him on the air every night." And that was it. And that was my introduction to broadcasting on Radio Caroline. A lot of people have said to me, you know, would you do it all again? At that age, yes. At this age, no. But
How old were you when you started though?
19. 19, yeah. Because this lot, Albert, Georgina, and a whole load of the others, threw a bunch. I spent my 21st birthday out there on the Mi Amigo, and we were using the English studio, which was downstairs at the time. And of course, you see the hatches on the Mi Amigo. One of them, well, some of them were to the cabins, but one was to the studio. They opened the one of the hatches Christmas Day and threw about, I don't know how many pounds of flour all over me. And it went everywhere, in the bloody mixer, everywhere. Mind you, I didn't have to clear it up, though. But, yeah, a lovely ship, it really was. I mean, yeah, obviously when it went down, it, upset me. It still upsets me to this day to talk about it. Because it was, you lived and breathed it, you know. And that was, actually that's probably the best way I could say the difference between when I started on the Ross Revenge to when I finished on the Mi Amigo. We lived and breathed the Mi Amigo. On the Ross, you never did. Now, though, I live and breathe the Ross Revenge. You know, that is, you know, to me, a very special ship. As indeed, I think all the ships I worked on, apart from the Voice of Peace. Yeah. I love the Voice of Peace. It was just the ship. Oh, and the Communicator. Yeah. Oh, terrible ships.
After the Mi Amigo, you obviously on the Voice of Peace. You were over in Ireland as well for a bit. Yeah. How did you get involved in the Ross Revenge then?
Oh, right.
Or was that before or after Laser?
No, that was because of, if it wasn't Laser, I probably wouldn't have been on the Ross Revenge, to be honest. Yeah. What happened was. Actually, the funny thing is, when I ended up going to, because it's all sort of work, you know, it's one of those weird things with offshore radio and radio in general. when I was on the Voice of Peace, I went down to the Voice of Peace right after the Mi Amigo sank. I stayed longer than my contract, and Aby said, "Are you coming back?" And I said, "Yes, I just wanted to get back to England for Christmas, 1980." So I went over to Ireland before going back to I was going to go back to Israel, to go and see Stevie Gordon and Tom Hardy, who were on Sunshine Radio, which was a radio station in Dublin. And I was sitting in the bar in the Sands Hotel, which is where Sunshine Radio was broadcasting from.
I've sat in that same bar.
Yeah, it's a nice place as well. Yeah, lovely hotel. And I was talking to Stevie and also Tom Hardy, and Robbie Dale came in, another great Caroline presenter. Robbie owned the radio station, and I got talking to him, and he just said, "What are you doing at the moment?" And I said, "Well, I'm working in Israel." And he said, "What are you working over there for? Why don't you come and work for me?" And I said, "Well, you got a job?" He said, "Yeah, when do you want me to start?" "Tomorrow." And that was it. So Robbie offered, he said, I've heard you on the Mi Amigo, like what you do, will you come and work with me? Ended up working in Ireland. 1983, late 83, I got a call, funny enough, from Paul Rustling, actually. And he just says, "Hello, is that Stephen Bishop?" And I thought, I haven't used that name for bloody ages, because I changed my name. On the Voice of Peace, I was Johnny Moss, which is my real name. Well, it's John Lewis Moss, actually, my real name, but I used Johnny Moss. Went to Ireland, and I was going to use Johnny Moss, but the same radio station I worked for, the newsreader, was called Peter Moss. So I just used my middle name, Johnny Lewis. And that's what I thought, why the hell is he calling me Stephen Bishop? And then he explained what he was doing. Now, the laser ship, most of it was fitted out in Fort Lauderdale in America. But a lot of it also was fitted out in New Ross in Ireland, near Waterford.
So, sponges.
Yeah. And I remember meeting, I think it was Paul, and there was a couple of them. We called it The Office at the time, but it was a bar called Ryan's Bar in New Ross. And they took me on the boat, had a look round the boat. Absolutely amazing. All new equipment, CSI transmitters, all brand new. Everything was brand new, the studios, and it really looked the part. And I remember saying, "Who's going to put the aerials up? When are you going to put the aerials up?" "Oh, we're going to fly balloons." And at that point, I fell off my bar stool laughing. And I said, "That ain't going to work in the North Sea." No, that isn't going to work in the North Sea. Anyway, I didn't sail with the ship from Ireland to the English coast. And funny enough, the ship, and again, I don't know whether this is common knowledge, the ship, when it originally came to the English coast, anchored in the South Falls. Found it too rough. That's when they moved to the Knock Deep, because they didn't want to be anywhere near the Ross Revenge at the time. So, although Christmas 1983, New Year of 1983, they were anchored 1.5 miles off Margate in the Margate Sands, but somebody got wind of what it was, and that was when somebody was tipped off and the ship moved out to the South Falls. Then it went up to the Knock Deep, and that was when the balloon tests were made on 729. Obviously, the first one, the balloon, it lasted about 5 seconds because there was no corona shield and nothing on the area.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to when it was in Ireland? I don't know if everyone's heard the story about the sponge detector on the ship.
No, I didn't. No.
The story that was spread in the local newspaper because of the mass and all the technical equipment was that it was detecting sponges
and an oil survey vessel. Yeah. That's it. Yes. There was all sorts of stories because of the lollipop, which was a satellite dish at the back of the ship. There was all sorts of stories in the Irish press at the time. So, of course, they wanted to get them away from it being, it's a radio ship. Because the one thing the Irish government, the likes of Sunshine Radio and Radio Nova in Ireland were broadcasting with like 10 kilowatt transmitters, 10 kilowatt FM transmitters as well, all on land without a license. But the government turned a blind eye. The reason the government turned a blind eye was because they could come and fine you or confiscate equipment under the 1929 Wireless Telegraphy Act in Ireland. I think it was £50. So all we used to do was give them £50 and they were quite happy and went away, and we continued broadcasting. So that was why these stations were allowed. But they got wind one day. There was a group of people going to do it as a bit of a fun thing, broadcasting from a yacht in Dublin Bay. Oh, Christ, they cracked down on that and said, "We don't mind you doing it on land, but you ain't doing it from sea." So totally different from here. So that's why they turned a blind eye. And also, at the time, there was so many general elections going on in Ireland that like I interviewed Albert Reynolds, who was the Minister of Post and Telecommunications, on a pirate radio, so-called pirate radio station. Now, can you imagine that happening over here? Yeah. So, anyway, that was the thing. Laser went out there. We did the tests on 729. I don't know again if people realise this as well. If you realise it, Robin Banks was also involved in that. Yeah, he was a godsend as well.
If I'm not mistaken, I think one of the other quirks with the Irish law from 1929, it defined a radio transmitter as a device for the sole purpose of transmitting radio programs. Yeah. So if your radio transmitter had a second purpose, like heating the room up, then it wasn't a radio transmitter any longer.
Yeah. So you didn't want a solid-state radio transmitter. You wanted valves. And at that point, they did, didn't they? Even in the output stage. So, yeah. So anyway, I went out to Laser, and I remember the first night I went out to Laser, it was January 19...
Can I just say one thing, Johnny? You're standing right in the front of the...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. You've had Dave Foster projected.
No, let's do that. Let's move away, because he's more important than me anyway. So, there we go. Lovely old job. As he would say. But, when I went out to Laser, I remember the first thing as we approached, we went by the Ross, and the first thing I remember was that mast, and it was night time. Even then, you could see how big that mast was, and it was just a spectacular sight. And again, looking at the laser ship, or looking from the laser ship at the Ross in rough weather, I mean, the laser ship was just all over the place. It was like that, and there was the Ross just doing that with that 300-foot mast, and that would be in a northeasterly, a really bad northeasterly. And anyway, I spent 2.5, nearly 3 months on the communicator. Once it came on the air on 558, then I went back to Ireland and continued working on ABC radio, as it were. Ronan had actually been calling me from day one when the Ross Revenge came on the air, saying, "When are you coming back to the lady? Come back to the lady." But I was quite happy living and working in Ireland. And one day he just caught me at the right time. He phoned me up on a Thursday, and this is how quick things can work. We know some things with Caroline are slow, some things are quick. And he phoned me up one Thursday, it must have been late afternoon. And he just called me at the right time, and he said, "When are you coming back to the lady?" I said, "Ronan, if you get me a ticket, I'll be over there tomorrow." He got me over there tomorrow, and I was out on the boat the next day. And that was it. And to be honest, it was the best thing I did. I mean, in the early days of when I came back to the Ross, every time I went on shore leave, I went back to Ireland and did a busman's holiday, but I always came back to the Ross. And I'm so glad I did. And here I am still to this day.
And of course in Ireland you're working with Steve Silby and others as well.
Yeah, Clive Derrick, Steve Silby. Yeah, it's just so many people, so many good people who eventually came onto the Ross as well.
The Ross, yeah. Brilliant.
Especially after the Irish government closed the stations down over there.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So if you're on the Ross, that's probably a good time to bring Ray in, if Ray would like to join us.
Ray nearly joined Caroline a lot earlier than he thought, actually, didn't you, Ray?
You want to stand on Johnny's side so David can get you on the video?
Foster, please. My hero. This is my hero. This is my hero. That side.
Stand next to Johnny, and then we can get your...
Oh, I'm not that. He's not that much of a hero. Just to pick up. Thank you ever so much for inviting us down, and Shelley's with me as well. We're really looking forward to this. Been looking forward to this. Yeah, I almost got out to the Mi Amigo. It's funny how things happen. So strange. I went to not Flashback 67, the next one, the Dutch one, Driftback. In 1978, and had quite a few of those little glasses. They're only small, of Heineken, but they make you speak fluent Dutch after about 2 or 3 of those. Double Dutch, yeah. And I befriended Hans and Louise van Dijk. And they're good guys and still very dear friends of mine now. And Hans said, "Come over to Holland, have a holiday." So I'd never been to Holland at that time. And I went over and he said, "Oh, we'll go down the bar a little later. My sister's boyfriend's in town. Peter Chicago." Oh my goodness, hang on, this could be interesting. And I met up with Peter 2 or 3 times during that week, and then I went over again. And I can remember one night we were in an Amsterdam bar, and everybody had had too much to drink. And I was dropping hints like there was no tomorrow. I bet it's good fun on Caroline. I bet it's good on the Mi Amigo. I wonder if you ever need any other people. And he said, do you want to come? And well, yeah, but I can't come just yet because of work. Anyway, the offer was there and the ship sank. So I never got out there. And then with Johnny, I was doing trips with Albert and Georgina. And there was one particular trip we went out, 2 boats. I mean, it was half of Essex went out there from Brightlingsea. And we got out there, and there's one boat, fortunately for me, the first one was unloading. The alert turned up, the Essex Police launch. And the 2 skippers decided it would be a good idea to head for home. The second boat had still got the passengers, so they had a trip from Brightlingsea out to the Ross Revenge and then back again. We eventually ended up back after leaving from Brightlingsea. We got back to Ramsgate at 4 o'clock the next morning, and Johnny and the crew on board had been trying to send messages, clandestine messages, to get us back. But I remember Johnny, because I befriended him, and he worked the same way as I wanted to work, and I got on well with Johnny. And he said, "Hey lad, we're short, do you want to stay?" And I was in a bit of a predicament because I wanted to, boy did I want to, but a bit like Johnny, hadn't got anything with me, not a passport, and I was working for the Department of Transport, and I thought, do we just run away from a job like that? And I thought I could go back and sort of have me noticing. Anyway, that's more or less what I did do, but it took another year before I got out there. But I think Johnny had got me lined up for the morning show the next day because you were short out there, weren't you?
Yeah.
And we've
Very
been mates
much
ever
so.
since. We've been mates ever since.
But we gave you a fish and chip supper.
Yes, yeah. They wondered how they were going to feed about, I don't know, a dozen of us extra. And one of the Dutch fishing boats had been around. I think they were sprats about that big. They were all bone. I don't think we tasted any fish, but at least the hospitality was good. So, yeah, it is being in the right place at the right time and just being so lucky to work with really nice people. And you know, I've been so lucky with the people I've worked with on Caroline to be lifelong friends, and they are. You know, it was a dream come true. It's what I always wanted to do. And then when you get there, you think, well, what's all the fuss about? You could have done this years ago. So you want to hear about Foster's first trip? Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah. Eventually, I was going out to Caroline, and I was picked up in Chelmsford by Cosmic, Captain Keith, and Kevin Turner. So there was the 4 of us. Me, I like to think, dressed reasonably normally. Cosmic, if you remember him, looked like anybody with the name of Cosmic would look, with his faded denim jacket and jeans and his thick hair and swarthy moustache. There was Captain Keith with a lovely Bristolian accent and hair almost down to his waist in a sort of clean but greasy boiler suit. There was Kevin Turner, who I knew, the only man I know with pleats in his jeans, so Kevin was there. And then me, and we all sort of belted off to Felixstowe. We got on the ship, on the ferry, and we were about to get off to go up and get a meal in the restaurant, and Cosmic said, wait. And everybody else was getting out of their cars, and eventually, when they'd all gone and we were the only people on the car deck, he said, "Go," he said, "but whatever you do, try not to look conspicuous." I mean, we couldn't have looked anything but... So we went out to Zeebrugge, past the Herald of Free Enterprise. It was that time. That very sort of somber moment for all the passengers, the whole crew, just sort of looking at what was going on there. Then we went from there to Dunkirk, and again Cosmic said, "We'll take the back road in case the feds stop us." I think he'd been watching too many gangster movies. And I said, well, because I'd been coach driving, and I said, well, the border, they haven't manned for 20 years. They're not going to stop you. Oh, we'll go on the back road. So we bounced along the back road, and we got to Dunkirk, and then it was too rough to go out for a while. And then this other guy turned up, and I think somebody said, "Who are you?" And he said, "You know, I'm Vince." Or later he would have said, "Here, what do you mean? Here I am." But Vince, and he'd come, I think, by train, and then somebody had given him a ticket to get over to Calais, and then he'd got up to Dunkirk. Anyway, we went out on the Bellatrix, And I've got a little bit of film of it, and I was trying to pass it on to David, but the quality isn't that good. But we were on the Bellatrix. Normally the Bellatrix, if it could, would tie up bow to stern, but it was too rough. So we went over in the sort of Greenpeace-style rubber boat, which was a bit hairy, and we all got soaking wet. We were on the ship, and I remember Peter Phillips coming up, and he said, "What radio experience have you got?" And we'd been talking, and Vince had done hospital radio, and I'd done mobile discos, but nothing much. And we figured it might be easier just to say none, because it's too difficult to explain. So Peter Phillips said, "What radio experience have you got?" And I said, "None." And he said, "Flipping marvellous," all words to those effect, and stomped off. I mean, fortunately, we've been good friends ever since. But yeah, we were there. And then Kevin Turner, I think said, "What do you fancy doing?" And as the new boys, you're not just about to say, "Oh, I'm going to do this or that." And he said, "Well, Ray, if you go on afternoons," and Vince got overnights, and then, because I was just going out for one trip, I didn't think I was good enough to do it. I still don't, to be honest, but I thought, go out there once. It was on my bucket list, even at the age of 32 or whatever it was. I was quite old to go out to Caroline. But it was magical, and yeah, it was nice to work with Vince, and we learnt the trade together, really. I think Vince stayed on about a week later than me, perhaps 2 weeks, and then came off, and then, like me, was due to come back again, but circumstances prevented. And then the next time I caught up with him was once Caroline was re-established. I'd finished with, I don't know where I was working, whether I was still at the BBC, but Peter Moore had said, "Can you come back and do some stuff?" And then I met up with Vince again. I'd sort of kept in touch with Johnny because we'd worked together at different stations, hadn't we?
Be my boss.
He's my hero. So yeah, and then back on the ship, I think a couple of memories of Vince, and then I'll pass on to others.
I was going to say, in a moment, we'll ask Andrew to come up as well.
Oh, yeah.
And then Andrew and Johnny can talk about how we launched Caroline on the satellite.
Brilliant.
ECAR studios in 1988.
Yeah, because I wasn't there then. Vince, with one thing I remember was when I first started doing programmes for Caroline, and I was recording at home, and I'd got a studio, but I don't understand the technical stuff. It's all above my head. And I hadn't recorded properly on... anyway, Vince says, "Here, that should be better than that. How many something or others are you using?" And I said, "What, Zogs?" And it sort of stuck. It was always a joke between me and Vince that all my programmes were recorded at maximum Zogs, because I don't know what the heck they are, but what are those things called? Where it says kilobytes. Kilobytes. Well, you get more Zogs with me. I always remember that. I'm trying to think what else. That was the one that sort of stood out. Oh, yeah, one more story. I did Weekend Breakfast, and it was one Saturday morning, and Vince had been doing overnights, and he came down, as you remember, he wasn't the quietest of people. He came down to the cabins, and he tapped on the door. Ray, it's 4:30 or 5:30 or whatever. And I said, "Yeah, all right, Vince, be there in a minute." And went back to sleep. About 10 minutes later, a bit louder this time. Ray, it's 4:45, 4:45. Are you there? "Yeah, all right, mate, be up in a minute." The next one, bang, bang, bang. "Right, you go in bed or not?" I don't know. I think we woke the whole crew up. I miss him.
What was it? "Yeah, Ray, yes, your first song's on. You got 2 minutes."
Yeah, and it's a 2-minute 20-second one, not a long one.
He was a lad.
I was going to say, one of the other things you were just talking about, fostering things. Rob Ashard and I always talked about when you're setting up the levels through the transmission chain, there's the music and speech levels, and there's Dave Foster levels. And you have to make sure everything can cope with Dave Foster levels.
Yeah, it was good.
Especially the microphone.
If you go on YouTube, there is a video. I mentioned the video that I've got, but there's also another video that I think Jan Veldkamp, Jan Parent, it was Jan Veldkamp on here, on Monique, put on YouTube, and try and find it, and it's Laser Visits Caroline. And it was in the days of Brandy Lee, and a guy called Paul, but I can't remember what his radio name was, and they're one engineer come seaman, and they came over in a rubber boat, and they'd been to see us, and there's a picture of most of the crew, a video of most of the crew out on deck on the Ross Revenge, And then they'd got about, as always happened, about a yard off, and the outboard motor broke, and they were drifting and drifting and drifting, couldn't get it going. But it is on YouTube. There's quite a few bits and pieces there to search out if you just sort of delve around a little bit. But it's a video by Jan Veldkamp, and I'm pretty sure it's called Laser Visiting Ross Revenge or something. But yeah,
brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Andrew, if you'd like to join us as well, please. And then, of course, Andrew, you were involved in the satellite service from the very early days at Vinters Park.
Yes, that's correct. Just to sort of reaim I don't have this checkered history these guys have. How did I get involved in Caroline? I think it was about 96, 97. There was an article in The Guardian that Peter Moore had made. So they wanted more volunteers. The thing that always sticks in my head, why the heck was I reading The Guardian? Anyway, to cut a long story short, I wrote a letter to 426 Archway Road and said that, my sales and marketing skills are there. If they're any use to you, that's fine. And I went and knocked on the door of 426 Archway Road, and this big Australian guy, Warwick, turned up there and, yeah, what do you want? So I thought, I've come to see Peter Moore. And this little man appeared from behind the counter and sort of looked up, and then he ducked down again, and that was the signal. He's not here today, what do you want? So I said, well, I wrote and said that, if you want to volunteer, I might be able to do some stuff. And just to take the whole story on there, I got a phone call a couple of weeks later, back in 97, saying the ship was off of, the Ross Revenge was in Queenborough in Sheerness, and did I want to go down and meet the guys? Now, my job was a sales and marketing manager, so I turned up on the Ross Revenge in my suit, leather shoes, tie, cufflinks, the business. And everyone ran for cover. What the heck, they thought I was the VAT man or the tax man, I don't know, on there. But I got to meet a few people on there. And to take the story forward from there was that if you move it through to 1999, there had been some talk of meeting up with the people who ran Maidstone Studio. And a meeting was set up, and Peter Moore said, well, you go, and Johnny go, and Nigel Harris came. That's great, isn't it, John? Yeah. Yep. On there. So we turned up. We were in the boardroom of this television company, made a television studio. And the guy who was taking the meeting was a guy called Arch Dyson. He was the managing director. And Arch Dyson, if that name sticks in your head, he was the producer for Hello, Hello. And if you, we were sitting in his office, and he's got all these BAFTA awards on the back of him there, sitting up with his feet on the desk, not really caring whether we were there or not. Johnny had his suitcase, I had my suitcase. In my suitcase, there's meeting notes and all the rest of it. In Johnny's suitcase, I don't think there was anything, was there?
There was nothing. No, I remember Ronan saying to me, if you go to a meeting and you want to look efficient, just take a briefcase. If there's nothing but air in it, that's all you need. It'll hang on. If there's nothing but air in it, that's all you need, Johnny.
But just to take it back a bit more, before us, there'd been a station operating down there by one of the engineers, a guy, can't remember his name now, European Classic Rock, but European and Classic with a K. And they'd had all the studio fitted out because this guy was a television engineer, so he'd used their engineering skills, hadn't he?
Barry Nutt.
Well, Barry Nutt was the engineer on there, and who was the guy?
Pete Leutner.
Pete Leutner, that's the guy I'm trying to think of there. And so they've got this pristine studio with these Air 2000 desks in there and all the kit and the rest of it. And I got a phone call from Caroline office saying, you live near Maidstone, don't you? So, yeah, what's up? Well, they've given us a day's airtime. So I said, well, how does that involve me? Well, they've recorded an 8-hour videotape, and if you go down to the studio, you can take all the phone calls and speak to the people, and we'll see how it goes. So I went into the studio and met Peter Leutner and Mark Stafford, who was running the station really at that point in time. And they then said, well, that's it. Sat me at the desk with all this equipment, which I'd never ever seen in my life before, and said, oh, well, we'll be back at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock? Oh, okay. So I sat there for 4 hours. I had one phone call, and that was because Johnny Reese was on the air, and his line was that he always had a pouring a glass of wine, wasn't it, on there? But this was 10 o'clock in the morning, so it wasn't really appropriate, but without doubt. And I sat there and sat there and sat there, and one phone call, and that was it. And anyway, to move the story forward, I think it was the 30th of December, wasn't it? European Classic Rock called it a day, didn't they?
Yeah.
So by then, we were sort of buying the odd hour of airtime on Caroline, and one or two people. The thing about Caroline is that we've always been fortunate that, although we haven't had a lot of money, one or two people have dealt into their pockets to get things moving. And so we had a couple of paid programs. They went out a couple of times on there. And then when EKR went bust on there, we had this meeting down with Maidstone Studios, and they said, well, how much are you going to pay? Well, the story, we haven't got a lot of money on there. And this guy, this Arch Dyson, this managing director, who's dealing in thousands of pounds, running all the TV programs on there, said to Barry Nutt, the chief engineer, well, what do you think, Barry? And Barry said, well, I think they're okay. They were his words, were they not, Johnny?
They were, yep.
And he said, well, it's on your head. If it all goes the wrong way, and I won't say the word obvious phrase for there, if it all goes your way, then you're in trouble. But Barry, to his credit, looked after us on there. And so we took a day's broadcast, didn't we?
2 days.
2 days.
2 days, Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, Saturday and Sunday.
So we, and this is when I got involved with this man, because he fitted out all the studio with his good mate Jay down there, and I went down. The fortunate thing being a salesman is that when you've done your calls, you can go and do something else. So in my time after I'd finished seeing my customers was spent down here, making tea and getting them organised within what happened on there. And lo and behold, we had the first Saturday on there. And that went pretty well. We had a bit of a party to launch it in the morning, didn't we?
We did, yep. And we had quite a few people come along as well. They used to do Saturday morning live on ITV as well from the Maidstone Studios. And quite often I used to do Saturday mornings, and it was Stephen Malherm, wasn't it? And Holly Willoughby would often pop in the studios. And I remember one time, I can't remember who it was, but let me just use the Spice Girls as an example. And they'd say, we got the Spice Girls on this morning. Do you want to interview them? And I'm thinking, on Caroline? Probably not. But they used to often come along. But it was a relax for them in between doing the programme live, because they used to have some bits that were pre-recorded. But they were only doing it down the studios, and you used to come and see us, didn't they?
They were just downstairs. There was all sorts of people who came through. But what used to happen was that we would have a pre-recorded programme from Caesar Brouwer in Holland, and they used to come on 2 mini discs to my house, and I would go in and put the first one on at 8 o'clock, and then I put the other one on at 8:30. Johnny would turn up. It was either Johnny or Nigel or Jerry Wright on there, so it was probably Johnny or Nigel really, but that's another story. Johnny would come in around about 7:45, and he'd go into the studio, and I'd make a cup of tea, but you had to make a mug of tea. You had a pint mug. And I'd look through the window. What's Johnny doing? Is he preparing for his programme? Because he's a broadcaster. He's a star, like Ray says. There's Johnny sitting back with a Cuban cigar, puffing away on there.
When I used to do that filthy habit.
And so that Johnny went on, and then PM made an appearance, didn't he? He used to come down. The chairman's speech, wasn't it?
The chairman speaks, yes, yeah.
On there. And this went on, and we did Sunday, and Nigel and Johnny were on there and saying, well, we're coming to the end of our broadcast now, and your famous words were?
Over and out.
No, we'll be back next week.
Oh, yes, yeah. We'll be back next week, because we weren't going to be back next week, were we? But then PM, as in Peter Moore, says, oh, my God, now he said it, we better be back. And we did, and we came back and just extended it, didn't we?
Well, that's how it started. We started doing Saturdays and Sundays, then we got 1 or 2 programmes a week, and it went from there, really, on there. Yeah. And then one Saturday morning, I used to go in at about 7 and load the programmes and make the tea and answer the phone and do those bits with the boys. And I think it was HA, Jerry Wright.
Jerry Wright, that is, yeah.
Beg your pardon. And Jerry was due on at midday. And Johnny went about 5 to 12. He put his last piece of music on. I'll see you next week, lad. Off you go.
Oh, gotta go.
On there. And Jerry will be in a minute. And it got to 3 minutes to 12, and there's no sign of Jerry. So I rang this man, and I said, there's no one here to do it. Well, you know how the desk works, Andrew. You do it. I've never done this before. So he said, well, it's only an hour, and then somebody will be in. But it got to 5 to 1, and 5 to 1, I read the same call in. Oh, well, there's no one coming. You better stay till 4 now. So that was my baptism of fire. And if it wasn't for this man, then you wouldn't have to put up with me every Sunday night. But thankfully you do on there. I love this man. I really did. He's a personal friend and a great broadcaster. The thing about Vince was, you'd say to him, we need this fixed. And you'd see him 2 days later and say, did you have a look at that, Vince? And he'd throw it at you and say, it's fixed.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done. And it was. He had a really short fuse. I will tell you that on there. And Ray, this is the same story as you go down with your Zog story. I built my studio at home, and I said to him, can you show me how this works? So he said, you do this, you put this up there, you plug that through there, switch that down, and that's done. Okay, well, I'll make some notes. Oh, for heaven's sake, Andrew. And he just disappeared like that. He did have the short fuse, but he's the greatest man. He was a personal friend of my family, and I miss him dearly. Yeah. David Foster, everybody.
Yep, yeah. Well done, Andrew.
Brilliant. Thank you all three. That was absolutely fantastic to go through, and brilliant tribute there to Dave.
First of all, thank you all so much for coming this evening. Am I doing this right? Yeah. It's a really special evening because we are remembering special people. And as always, your generosity is amazing. You know me, I'm coming around with the buckets, asking for donations. But your generosity is truly amazing, and it's so much appreciated. And I'm not going to mention names or do anything, but 2 people here this evening have just made the most generous donations to Radio Caroline that I've ever witnessed. Thank you to those 2 people. And also, Alan, I would just like to say I'm so sorry that Mandy couldn't be here to join us, because she's a live wire in the society. And that's it. I've had my few words.
Thank you very much. Also, I'd like to mention tonight we have Malcolm Williams and his good lady Cheryl. Malcolm is the brother of David Williams, and of course David is known to many of you for going back to 1970s. I know Chris from Birmingham has known David. So we've got Malcolm and Cheryl here, so thank you to them for coming along. Malcolm has also brought a lot of Dave's Caroline and Offshore radio memorabilia as well. So that's all looking for a good home and a new home. So much of that is actually on the merchandise stand. So feel free to make a donation for some of that, and all that money will be going into the Ross Revenge as well. Mandy does pass on her best wishes. She hasn't been very well this week, and it was touch and go as to whether she came down, but this morning I spoke to her and we decided she didn't feel quite up to coming down, but hopefully for the next meeting she'll be fine.
We've got an auction for some memorabilia.
And we've got an auction for some memorabilia. We've got a man who actually wants to be an auctioneer, so we'll do that after we've had a bite to eat. So once again, thank you everyone for coming along. The pre-Christmas meetings are not always the busiest because people got everything to do and the weather's not very good and horrible dark nights and things. So it's good to see such a good turnout tonight. Foster, of course, was quite a regular at the meetings, so I'm sure he would appreciate everyone having made the journey tonight. Open the floor up then, if any of you got any questions for our star team tonight.
I think Albert said on the generator failure in October '78.
Yeah.
Allegedly, or something, or somebody said, is there did it just fail? Because there used to be a kind of conspiracy theory about whether it really failed or whether somebody put sand in it or something.
Oh, Albert?
Yes, it was true. It was a generator failure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's all I want to know. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Come on, let's have lots of questions.
Yeah, it's just one thing. It's not really a question, but it's just sort of like saying, I mean, obviously, I met Dave here several times, and he knew people I knew, but he was the first person to show me around the Ross Revenge. I went, it was about 5-6 years ago to this day. And I remember him talking about I think it was Studio 3. They were just starting to get that up and running.
Yeah.
And the one thing he was talking about was that the idea about 648 and the studios on the Ross was to try and sort of encourage youngsters to train.
Yeah.
And I think what a fitting tribute that is to him, that we've now got the likes of Ellie and Josh, that sort of they've been encouraged to sort of learn the skills, and that they've really sort of he fostered that idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, very much so. And also, of course, there's ongoing training all the time with the community, the Caroline Community Station, which is ongoing all the time.
It's just nice that he was just sort of thinking that well, we've got these studios, we can get these guys in and train them.
And Josh has really, I think, fitted in well with the station, the music, the format, and the camaraderie as well.
Well, Josh is more or less running Caroline Coastal, which is the community station for Essex.
Yeah. So good for that.
I think that's. I'll holler because I can holler if I need. I think that's a very valid point, because Josh has come along via Caroline Community Radio, as was. He emailed, said, "Can I have a job?" Not yet. We'll have you. And Ellie, but serious point. Caroline needs younger blood to continue when we've all gone. So we might have missed the boat with daughters and sons, but grandchildren. If you've got any that you're thinking actually that's what they're interested in, then just point them towards Caroline. You never know what might happen.
It's amazing how many grandchildren, 18, 20-year-olds. I'm always amazed when you see a 20-year-old walking down the street with a Rolling Stones T-shirt or a Doors T-shirt or something. It's just like, that's like grandparents' music.
Well, Ellie's actually been coming out to the boat since we've been doing North, when she was about 8 years old, and making videos, hasn't she? We've starred in some of her videos, so we just thought we'd take a flyer with her and put her on the air, and it seems to be working.
Yeah.
So.
Ellie being the daughter of Nick, who's a tender skipper who runs a tender up to the ship. So that's how she's been.
Good at catching fish.
Not your dad.
Don't go fast enough.
Brilliant.
Sorry, Nick.
No more questions then.
Yes, I've got one.
Yeah, go on then.
For Johnny.
Yeah.
Rumour has it you got a little bit wet once between two ships. Would you like to expand on that?
I did. Actually, my very first trip to the Mi Amigo was also could have been my very last one. No, it was the tyre, wasn't it? I jumped on a tyre. We had these huge, great fenders on the Mi Amigo, and I mean like racing car fenders. And it was quite a rough day, wasn't it? It was quite rough. And I thought to myself, I can get on board now, no problems. I'll just jump from the tender onto the tyre, onto the Mi Amigo, because the Mi Amigo was a hell of a lot lower in the water than the Ross Revenge. I jumped onto the tyre and the bloody chain gave way. So I ended up between the two boats in the middle of November. So, yeah. And all I was worried about was getting my wallet out of my pocket, and Tony Allen grabbed it. And then he grabbed me.
Because the other problem is not just the wet, it's the fact you've got 100 tons of two boats coming together.
Because I do remember actually grabbing the tyres, pulling myself away from the from the boat.
Before the two come crashing together.
Yeah, so that was it. But I can, as you can see, I lived to tell. Some people say shame.
We were fighting like hell to keep the boats apart.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, actually, in all, Frank, wasn't it? Frank, who was the tender skipper, he did a fine job there, because he literally backed straight off very quickly. So, but it's moments like that you don't hear about when people say, "Why don't you go back to sea?" Yeah, we'd love to go back to sea, but why? Why? We don't need to now. Why put people's lives at risk like that? I mean, the one thing we can say about Caroline is, and how the hell we got away with it, I don't know. Nobody ever lost their lives, and nobody was seriously injured. I really don't know how to this day, to be honest.
Yeah, the stories about outboard engines conking out and navigators not working and fogs coming down and no compass on board.
How did we get away with it? How did we get away with it, eh? Too many people looking the other way. And that's the only way I can explain it, because we did nothing undercover, right? We used to sail out of Brighton Sea the same day, every week, and the same time. And there was never anybody there when we went, and there was never anybody there when we came back, except on one occasion. I think we had the police, and they weren't bothered about us.
They just told us to keep the noise down.
Right. That was it. Yeah. Nobody bothered.
Yeah.
So, we got away with it because everybody was looking over the shoulder the other way. And that's right, isn't it, Johnny? Yeah.
There was one of the things that happened to me when I started working for Invicta in Kent, which was the local ILR station, was a couple of guys came up to me in a pub in Canterbury and said, "Oh, Mr. Moss," and I thought, "Who the hell's he? But can we buy you a drink?" And I thought it was just because of Invicta. No, they're actually two guys from the DTI because of the radio regularities department in Kent is at Maidstone. So they were in Canterbury. And they just said, "Thank you for all the endless entertainment you gave us. We really enjoyed it." And also all this business about laser. They were after laser because it was popular. Yes, it was popular. They were after laser because they didn't know what was going on. Whereas Caroline, they knew everything about us. And that, I can tell you, came from the horse's mouth. So, there we go.
Got a similar story. I did a talk for the Sawbridgeworth Historical Society last June, and it went well, and it was all about Caroline, and a man came up at the end of it, and he said, "Oh, I really enjoyed that." He said, "I've really been looking forward to coming here. I'm Barry Maxwell." And I thought, I know that name. I said, "Barry Maxwell. Yeah, I used to be the head of the radio regularity department at the DTI. I said, "Oh, great." So anyway, we had a heck of a chat. And then he bought one of my books. And I said, "Can I sign this to you?" And to Barry, the man who spied for the DTI. And he took it in great heart. And we've met up a couple of times since. And I interviewed him for the third edition of the book. And heard it's quite an eye-opener, actually. And they just did what they had to, and as little as they had to, really, because they could have closed it down. If they'd have got really heavy, they knew what was going on, as Albert says. Anyway, he's booked a Caroline tour for a talk for him and his mates in April in Sawbridgeworth. So
the last time they toured was August '89. Oh, that was uninvited.
One more.
Yeah.
The general chair, because I was out.
I'm going to say, you could invite Barry along to one of these meetings if he's got stories to tell.
I was pulled over one morning because obviously you're out at 4 o'clock in the morning. What the hell are you doing out at 4 o'clock in the morning? And with all these records and that on the back seat and the food and all that, and where you going? I said, "Oh, nowhere. Just friends, and we do a disco." With all that food? Well, yeah. Oh, we're not too sure about that. Anyway, have a good trip. Get him to play a request for us, will you, please?
Brilliant, yeah. There's another little story on a slightly sidetrack. I know a guy who left Ofcom a couple of years ago, and Ofcom have moved offices and slimmed down, and he was clearing out some old Ofcom offices, and in a filing cabinet he found DTI logbooks from like 84, 85, 86, exactly who was going out on the ship, who was coming back, what boats were going out, and Ofcom had, or the DTI as it was then, had got all these logbooks of everything that was going on, and they'd sat in this dusty filing cabinet at Ofcom for years, and they were about to go into skip, and this guy's taking them home. So one day they may be coming into the public domain, but at the moment he's keeping them under his hat.
What was it? I can't remember the guy's name. You'd know, Alan. Second in charge at Ofcom. The guy came out with a tour, came out on one of our boat trip tours. No, not Laurie, no.
Not Jim Murphy or...
No. I can't remember his name. Lovely guy. Came out with his children.
Yeah.
And he said...
Peter Madry. Or
that's the one.
Yeah.
And said, he pulled me to one side and just said, "I've got my children here. Can one of you guys who worked on the ship when you were at sea show them around?"
Brilliant.
I think you were there one morning when we got pulled by the customs in Brighton.
Yeah.
And
5:30 in the morning. Joanne Fisher, Mark Yackers and myself. And they told us to keep the noise down.
Yeah, keep the noise down. And can you get us higher request? Yeah. And I said, "Oh, well, I don't know." I know they gave you a letter,
Yeah.
didn't they?
Yeah.
To make sure everybody on board read this letter. We hadn't a clue what it was. In an official envelope, Her Majesty's service across the top, you know, across all this. And anyway, got back on land, and they met us. They have a good trip. Yeah, we thought he did. Oh, yeah, they've been playing our requests.
Brilliant. Excellent.
It's quite the show over here.
Brilliant, fantastic. I think we'll take a break there for food then, everybody, and then we'll come back in about half an hour for a little wrap up and everything. Please express your appreciation for the guys who've come along tonight.
Thank you very much. Can we also say as well, on behalf of the station, thank you very much for all your support as well, because without people like you, we just couldn't do it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody. We've got a few things to auction here. The first few items are all books, and what we're going to do is go way back into time for the first item, and actually back 59 years, would you believe? And we have this book here, this lovely book. It's the Radio Caroline Annual. Get away from the screen, they said. All right, okay. I look a bit less psychedelic now. It's the Radio Caroline Annual.
I think that's Hilton Foster, obviously.
Published in 1965, for around about this time of year. Lots of lovely illustrations, a bit about the station, and a lot about all the pop stars at the time. Now, if you go on eBay, these are going to cost you at least 20 quid. But we're not asking that. We've got a low reserve on these books. So who's going to start me at £4? £4. Did I hear £4? Yes, 4, 6, anywhere? 6, right, selling. Any advance on 6? 8. 8. Any advance on 8? 10 over there, thank you very much, sir. 10, any advance on 10? 12? 12. Any more than 12? At £12. At £12 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman. Thank you. Now, if you want to know a lot more about Radio Caroline in the 60s, then some of you may remember that it's all in the magic book. And the magic book is Radio Caroline by John Venmore Rowland, published by the Landmark Press, Lavenham, Sussex. See, I remember these ads, even all this one. Very interesting. It's the whole story of Radio Caroline from when it... book's published in 1967, and it's the whole story of Radio Caroline from when it was conceived, when it started, up to just before the Marine Offences Act. So, well worth a read, and again, out of print book, quite rare. So who's going to start me at a couple of quid? £2? £2 over there. 4? 4? Do I hear 6? 6 over there, thank you, sir. 8 over there, yeah. 10 over there, thank you very much. 10, 12. Any advance on 12? 14 over there, thank you very much. Any advance on 14? 14 going once, going twice. Sold. Gentleman over there.
Thank you very much.
Well done, sir. Yeah. Well done.
Right. We're moving on a bit now. We're moving up to the 70s, 1975. This was a book that was well promoted on Radio Caroline at the time. Offshore Radio by Jerry Bishop. And it has details of all the stations from the 1970s and the 60s. Again, lots of illustrations. Details of all the broadcasting staff that were on board. It's a very comprehensive book when it came out, and it tells you a lot about that period, really up until 1975. It was very much a sort of iconic book of its time, and again, pretty rare. So anyway, who's going to start with £2?
It's beautiful.
It is. It's really nice quality. £2 over there, thank you. 4? £4 over there. Any advance on 7 over there? 8 over there. 9 over there, thank you. 10 over there. Any advance on 10? 10? 11 over there, thank you very much. 11. 11. £11 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman over there with the glasses. We're into the Well, the book is from the 1980s, but it's the stories behind the 60s pirate radio stations. The Beech Fleet by Mike Leonard. Very, very good information, very comprehensive. I saw one on eBay the other day and it was 23 quid. So probably get it for a bit less than that here if you're lucky. So who's going to start with £2? £2 anywhere? £2. You can't buy a newspaper for that these days, can you? Come on. £5 it is, sold to the man over there. With a Radio Caroline t-shirt, that'll make life easier.
Oh, perfect. How much was that? I can't remember. 5
Thank you, everybody. That's been really useful, and it's good to have some. You know, as I say, you can buy these things on eBay, but the thing is, you don't know who the money's going to. Buy it here, buy it now. You don't pay postage, and it means that Caroline gets the money. Now we have some even rarer items coming there, which Derek is going to bring up with us now. We have a collection of 4 DVDs, the Offshore Radio Years Volume 2, Volume 9, Volume 8 and Volume 6. Radio Mercure, Eulenspiegel, Radio Such, Radio Invicta, all sorts of stuff on here. So 4 DVDs, I mean, it's something to watch over Christmas because the telly is absolute crap, isn't it? So who's going to start me on a £5? I got £5 over there, thank you. 6? 6 over there, thank you. 6, any advance on 6? 7 over there, thank you very much. Any advance on 7? Any advance on 7? Going once at 7? 8 over there, right? Any advance on 8?
10. He said 10.
10? Oh, 10. Hey, we're doing well here. Right. Any advance on 10? Going once at £10? Going twice? It's yours, sir. Here we have a framed photo of the Ross Revenge. I warn you, these are very much rarer items, so there's going to be a bit of a higher reserve on here. Lovely colour photos, as I say, fully framed, all ready to hang on your wall. Who's going to start me at a tenner? I've got £10 over there. At £20 it is. Thank you very much, sir. And finally, now this one really is a bit special. This is a diagram of the Mi Amigo, details of the ship, and it's a plan. It also shows a picture of it when it was the Olga, and so on. So this is a beautiful plan of the Mi Amigo. So who's going to start me at a tenner? If I don't see 20, then again it'll live to fight another day. 20. Wow, the man over there, 20.
Oh my God, look at this.
We are there. Can you take that over?
Real thing coming up.
If you pop that on the deck, I'll... Now this one's been at sea, and the Radio Caroline in glorious red and white. Well, it's faded a bit, but it's red and white. But you can see the genuine sea stains on this one. There aren't many of these around, I'll tell you. Anyone else? At £30? At £30? 35? Oh, nipped in just in time there. At 35?
50.
50. Right, someone's gone 50. Well done, Roger. Thank you very much. Right, are we all done and all finished at 50?
55.
55. Oh, hey, this is good stuff. Right, 55. Any advance on 55? Do I hear 60 in the room anywhere? 60. Well done. 60. Wow, this is going well. Do I hear 65 anywhere? 65. Way, we're at 65. Wow. Any advance on 65? Do I hear 70 in the room? 70 we've got. Yay. Any advance on 70? At £70. Going once, going twice. £70 it is yours, Roger. Thank you very much, everybody. As Derek said, it's the first time we've tried this here, and it's good to see that we've raised a bit of money, and particularly tonight because we're honouring Dave Foster. And I know it's quite poignant for me because actually last time I came to one of these meetings, because I live overseas, as some of you know, was when we paid tribute to Roland Beanie. And I was in that corner over there talking to Andrew Austin and Dave Foster. And it was very clear that Dave really loved the North Weekends and the Ross Revenge and so on. So I think the fact that we've raised so much money is a great tribute to him. So thanks everybody much for your bits.
So we've just got the raffle to go, guys. My good lady's just wrapping up the tickets. It's been a really lovely evening, very successful. I'll just reiterate what's been said already. Thank you all for coming. What I'm going to do, I'll put a newsletter out with the amount of money we've raised for the Ross, but I'm sure that Peter Moore and everyone else associated with the Ross will be very pleased. So thank you very much indeed, guys. The next meeting's in March, so we look forward to seeing you all again there. So thank you. Cheers, guys.
Tell us your life history.
Life history. Now, where do we start? As we're here tonight, I didn't make the funeral because I was in France. So, a couple of memories from me for Mr. Foster from Vinters Park, Maidstone, where the station used to broadcast. His son is Chris. My son is Chris. They're the same age. So, Mr. Foster, Vince would be at the studio, and as you probably may know or may not know, that I'm camped out on the Music Extravaganza Part 2, Monday night on Caroline, on the album channel, and that Dave would come down on a Monday night from Strood, the studio, and bring some Desperados, which was maybe a strange combination, but it was one of those things we did. And also his love of Christmas. We did the Caroline North through the period that we won't mention, that period. And so some of the Caroline North broadcasts were from Strood. And the thing is, I don't know if you know, Dave was a big fan of Christmas. So there are a few numbers of people that in the organisation that I kind of would rather leave it. It's my birthday, Christmas Day, along with the lad over there. So we always, I think, celebrate Christmas. But Dave was a big fan of Christmas. And so we did the December Caroline North broadcast from the mainland studio, which is basically a hub. There's an awful lot of things going on there, very clever things as well, that make it sound good and get it to parts that it needs to get to. So it's all good. It's essential. But one of the things we did while that Caroline North broadcast was in progression was Dave decorated the studio there were Christmas decorations right through the studio. There were lights, all little. It was kind of almost like a Santa's grotto. So yes, amazing memories, and a big fan of family. We went to the Hop Farm Festival, which was a festival that took place at the Paddock Wood Hop Farm. So we saw Echo and the Bunnymen, Suede. So yeah, 1 in a million. And Mr. Foster. And I think, we're 3 months on, so but we are desperately missing him. I don't think there was a day that he didn't do something for Caroline. So, I've got a Desperado over there, which I'll have in memory of the great man. But anyway, there's a raffle.
Yeah, are we ready?
Yeah. So let's do that. And many thanks for coming along tonight. It's great to have our special guests as well that have also been up. Andrew. We've also got the brilliant John Ellery on Mondays, and also Caroline North. Phil Meek over there as well, so appreciated. And Mr. Clark. Well, I'll do the first one. Yeah, I'll be
bold.
Okay.
Be bold.
Right, so let's do this one. Ooh, lucky 226. 226. 284. Thank you, the hard-working team here at the Handball Club, behind the bar, and for the food. So, nice one. Thank you very much. We'll be back next year. And thanks to Alan, as always. Top man.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming along, everyone. If you're going home tonight, safe travels. If you're staying over tonight, if you're in a Prince consort, enjoy the breakfast in the morning. I believe it's legendary. And we'll see you all in March. Thank you all very much. Have a good Christmas and a good New Year.